Hello, Archons, and welcome back to Phlox'em and our timing chart series. We are finally in episode 10. This will be the last episode of our primary series where we're just going first to last through the actual timing chart. I'm hoping to get to do some shorter videos just going through specific examples after this, but we've got to finish out our turn. It's taken long enough, but we'll get there. So in this episode, we're going to look at several different sections of the timing chart, all pertaining to the end of the turn. But the way that these are all written out, they're essentially one step each. So there's not a whole lot of detail to get into with each of them. So we're just going to go through all of them together and go from there. Like always, we'll go through some examples of things that can really change how things resolve at the end of your turn and stuff like that. So we'll take a look, but let's get into our actual chart and go from there. Alrighty, let's get into our timing chart. So you've basically finished playing and using all of your cards. You're ready to end your turn. Most of the time, this is going to be a pretty quick action where you say, that's all, pass turn or whatever, and then you kind of ready up and draw or whatever. And that's fine. Those are kind of the right things to do. But there are situation scenarios, certain cards where it is actually very important to have the sequence of these down. And really, for tournament play especially, just to really make sure you have sort of the muscle memory of how all of these work so that you're really just going through all of the motions correctly each time. You know how to resolve things in the proper order just to really make sure that you're getting kind of the most accurate, clean play possible. So step 4, we're going to start with ready cards. It's important that this happens before your draw card step because there are cards that reference the ready step. And some of them, especially in Grim Reminders now, will ready or not based on whether or not you're haunted. And so knowing that this happens before you draw cards, which could flip your deck and make you not haunted, is really important. So after you're done playing and using your cards, the first thing that happens, even if you have an empty hand, is that everything readies. Every card you played, creatures and everything, gets ready at the end of that turn. Pretty straightforward. Again, we'll look at just really quick examples of this. Step 5, draw card. Draw cards until you have 6 or more in your hand, adjusting for chains or card effects. With Grim Reminders, again, there are cards that are going to say you draw different amounts based on whether or not you're haunted. And the fact that you can draw through brought this into question. Ghost Galaxy released a rule update recently saying that the amount of cards that you are supposed to draw is determined at the start of this step. So it's not as you draw each card. Other important things here. So again, the fact that the ready card step has happened before this, you have cards like Greater Oxtet, which may have fired and purged a card from your hand. If that happens, you are drawing that card back or a new card to replace that purged one. You're not ending up with a card of or a hand of 5 cards. However, there are other cards like Titan Librarian, which will make it so that after you have drawn these cards, you then archive one of them, meaning you will have less cards in hand at the start of your turn. You do draw cards before your opponent starts their turn. Again, this isn't always relevant. You can kind of do it while they're getting their turn started. But what's important about that is when they go to do discard effects or things like that, things that might affect your hand, you do have that full hand of 6 cards. You have reshuffled if needed, and they are affecting that, not sort of whatever's left after you've done your turn. So just remember, you're always drawing back up to your normal hand size, whatever that is, based on chains or other effects. Normally it's 6 at the end of your turn. Last step is end of turn effects resolve. And this is going to be one we'll probably spend a little bit more time on in the examples because it's pretty simple otherwise, right? It is just end of turn effects, very similar to the start of turn effects. Once you have done steps 4 and 5, then these effects trigger. And they can be anything from destroying creatures to gaining you extra amber, whatever it is. There's going to be all kinds of different things, removing your opponent's amber, but these are happening at the end of your turn. What's important is there's actually going to be 2 different phrases you need to look for and know how they interact. And that is at the end of your turn, X happens. And the other is until the end of your turn. Until the end of your turn effects are in effect until all of your at the end of your turn effects have resolved. And again, in our examples, we'll look at a situation where that matters, but that is important to remember. There are going to be a lot of persistent effects that say they are there until the end of your turn or even the end of your opponent's turn. that means that any effects that should trigger at the end of your turn have already triggered before that persistent effect goes away. Once those things are done, you've read your cards, you've drawn up, you've triggered any of those last effects, your turn is over, and your opponent goes to their start of turn effects on their turn. Again, kind of like we've talked about with these other things, what's really important is before you start steps 4 and 5, because you can't go backwards, you can't go back to step 3 once you've started step 4 and 5, you really need to make sure you actually dealt with what your opponent is doing, because some of even your own end of turn effects could cause them to forge a key. So always be on the lookout for those things, because you can't stop these, you can't change the order. They are going to happen if they are the end of turn effects, so keep an eye out for that. That's pretty much it. Let's get into our examples really quick and we'll go from there. So to demonstrate our end of turn stuff, I'm basically just going to go through a whole turn. Turn's not going to have a whole lot going on with it. We're not going to get into any of those other kind of special things too much, but I am going to just kind of do that to show I've played cards, I've used cards, and then here's what the upkeep kind of looks like just based on your hand, based on what's on the board and all of that. We do have some effects that will trigger during our end steps, so we'll take a look at those, but basically this is just going to be kind of what this looks like from a high level, again, getting that muscle memory part of how this works. So I have my hand here. I've got some cards. Sorry, the sleeves on this deck are maybe not the nicest sleeves, but we'll get there. So I've already got this disc creature out here, this Greater Oxtet, and I have 3 discards in hand. So I think I'm just going to call Dis here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to play Soul Fiddle. Again, there were no start of turn effects or anything, so we're going straight into step 2, choosing a house, which is Dis. And then step 3, I'm just going to play, use, and discard cards. I'm going to play this Inspector back a little bit from the main line because the Greater Oxtet has Taunt here, so just to kind of represent that it can't be attacked. I'm also going to play this Buzzle over here. Buzzle does have a play effect that allows me to purge a creature to ready and use it. I'm not going to do that right now. I kind of want to just keep this Greater Oxtet alive because we'll see it actually has a powerful ability in the end step. I'm going to go ahead and reap with this Greater Oxtet, gain 1 Amber, and then I have no more discards in hand. I have nothing else on the board that I can activate and use, so I'm going to be done with my step 3, which will then trigger step 4. Step 4 is the ready card step. So I've played some cards, I've used some cards, all of these are going to ready. The ordering of readying these does not matter. It's all going to be basically simultaneous. I don't think there's any cards where it really does matter at the moment, but in case you're wondering, it's considered a simultaneous thing that happens. Now, Greater Oxtet here has an ability that says at the end of your ready card step, which again is very important. This is before I have drawn cards. At the end of your ready card step, purge a card from your hand. If you do, give Greater Oxtet 2+1 power counters. This might seem like kind of a weird ability to want to purge one of your own cards, but you'll see in a moment why it's important that it's happening in this step and why it can actually become a very good ability. So I can see here I have 2 Untamed cards and 1 Star Alliance card. If I want to handcraft towards one of these being my majority in my hand, or even trying to look for more discards, what this allows me to do is maybe purge this Commander Chan. Greater Oxtet gets +2 power. And now you can see I went from 3 cards in hand to 2. I'm going to draw up to 6, so that means I'm actually going to draw 4 this turn instead of the 3 that I would have if I didn't purge that card. Now, sometimes this can backfire if you only have cards left in hand that you want to keep, but in general, being able to draw more cards is a very strong thing in Keyforge, even if it means you're kind of losing potential value from some other cards that are kind of whatever. Being able to draw cards, get through your deck fast is generally considered a good thing in this game. So now we'll go into step 5. Because of Greater Oxtet, I only have 2 cards in hand, so I draw up to my regular 6. There are no other effects that change that, so I'll just go ahead and do that. You can see I still draw 1 at a time, and unfortunately I drew 4 Star Alliance cards, so maybe that was not the correct purge, but again, it can depend on the deck's overall strategy and all those other things. But drawing 4 cards instead of the 3 I would have does mean I have more options for kind of what I'm going to see at the end of that turn there. So that's our drawing step. Again, as we said in the timing chart, if there are other effects that make you draw more or less, that is when you would count them in there as well. If I had a chain, so let's say these are still on top here, and I have 1 chain. If you haven't seen chains before, there's sort of a slowdown mechanic, they're a balancing mechanic, but they're also on some cards that have strong abilities. They give you chains sort of as a way to balance that card. Say I have 1 chain. For each 6 chains you have, you draw 1 less card on your draw step. So if I have anywhere between 1 to 6 chains, I will only draw up to 5 cards. So if I have 1 chain, I'm going to draw up to 5 instead. And then what would happen is I would lose that 1 chain because I've kind of used its effect. So each chain does that for 1 turn. Each 6 chains makes you draw 1 less. So if I have 7 or more chains, I would draw down to 4. If I have 12 or more than 12, I would draw down to 3, and so on. And every time you draw less because of chains, you lose 1 chain. Okay, we're almost done here. Now we just have our end of turn effects. The only one on the board right now is this Fangtooth Cavern. This is, again, an at the end of your turn effect. At the end of your turn, destroy the least powerful creature. In this case, that's going to be the Imp Spectre, which is a 2-power creature that also has a destroyed effect. And it says, destroyed, purge a random card from your opponent's hand. So if this is the smallest creature on the board, I get to destroy it because of this Fangtooth at the end of my turn. And then I purge a card from my opponent's hand right before they're going to start their turn. So you can see these end of turn effects can be really good ways to kind of really get the most out of your turns. But they can also backfire if you really want to keep your board alive and something like this just keeps eating your creatures. That can be a problem. What's important to note again is if you have, say, multiple Fangtooth Caverns or whatever, you as the active player do get to choose the order in which those fire. If there are multiple end of turn effects, you're choosing. So there are ways where you can kind of stack how these end of turn effects are happening to really get the most advantage. And this includes your opponent's cards as well if they are at the end of every turn. Lots of them are going to be like this one where it's just at the end of your turn, but it is possible that you're firing multiple effects from both players at the end of each turn. So make sure you're taking a look at that. Let's get into a quick example of where this can get a little bit tricky to know how it resolves. So here's another scenario where we're going to see kind of that idea of until the end of turn and at the end of your turn. We have the Fangtooth Cavern down again. We already saw what that does. And normally at the end of a turn, if this is the board state, my opponent has this Commander Dirkscar. I have this Ironyx Rebel. Ironyx Rebel is the smallest creature. So at the end of my turn, Fangtooth Cavern would destroy my Ironyx Rebel. But if on my turn I had played Plague Wind, which says play until the end of the turn, each non-Mars creature gets -3 power. So if I play this on my turn, this Commander Dirkscar is considered to be 1 power until the end of my turn. You might get to the end of your turn and say, this is at the end of my turn. So what happens here? Well, like I said, until the end of your turn effects are going to stay there until all of your at the end of your turn effects have resolved. So when this Fangtooth would go off, if I have played this Plague Wind, this Commander Dirkscar is still 1 power when this Fangtooth Cavern needs to target something. So what would happen is this would actually get destroyed by the Fangtooth instead of my Rebel. You can see with Mars, there can be some really cool combos with this. There's going to be very few scenarios where this actually matters again, but just be aware that those persistent effects will remain essentially until your opponent actually starts their turn, whereas your end of turn effects have to trigger before that happens. So really quick, let's talk once more about the idea of drawing and chains or other things that can affect your draw, because this is one of the easiest things to mess up in a tournament. And right now, the rules for if you mess this up can actually be pretty brutal, but overdrawing is never a good thing when there are kind of these different effects, but it's also a very easy thing. So I did not come up with this. I believe the first time I heard it was on the Help from Future Self podcast, which is a fantastic podcast if you go check them out. But what they sort of said that they like to do, and I actually really like doing this as well, is after you play your turn, so say I'm going to do just a couple of these cards here, go Untamed, just drop some creatures and an upgrade. When I decide I'm done with my turn, I'm actually going to put my hand down, and then I'm going to ready these, and then I'm going to draw. And so now I have my 3 cards here. Normally, I would draw my 6 cards. So I go, or draw up to 6. So there I have drawn 3 new cards. It's very easy to tell which are which ones I just drew. I'm not even going to look at them, But what is really good about this is, say I forgot that my opponent has a succubus out, which says I draw one less card. Very easy to take this card because we know it's the last one I drew and put it right back there. I haven't looked at it. There's no information gained or anything. It's very easy to rectify. Same thing, if there's something that causes me to draw one more, I can always add one to that. So again, this is much more of a muscle memory thing. You don't have to do this, but it can be a very good way of just really making sure before you even start your next turn that you have actually covered all of the scenarios as far as drawing or not drawing. If there's random discards, you can easily kind of pull stuff from that as well. But it just gives you a little bit more time to make sure that all of those persistent effects, which can be tricky, there's a lot of persistent effects in this game. The board state can get very complex with those kind of things. You want to make sure that you're really tracking with all of those things as far as the actions you're taking. It is both players' responsibility to keep up the board state, which includes hand size and things like that, especially if, like I said, your opponent is causing you to have a lower hand size. They should be reminding you as well. But the best way to mitigate the downside of getting it wrong is to kind of do something like this, where all of your cards are sort of really clear which one was drawn when, and you can sort of fix that as you see it in the board state. Just a side note there, but wanted to point that out because it is something that has really helped me a lot to be really clean with my play and stuff like that. That's all of our examples for today, though. Again, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you hopefully in some new Phlox'em content as we go on from this series. And with that, we have finished the timing chart series. Again, I'm hopeful to do a few more examples or just kind of cool things you can do with the timing chart and kind of how specific cards can interact with it more. But as far as the series as a whole, it is now at an end. 10 episodes. Hopefully it's not too much information to give to a new player. If it has been helpful for you, please let me know. Thank you so much to everyone who's been watching and supporting, and especially giving feedback. I know people like Ketzer, Fudginator, and some others have really helped with that and helped me get kind of more stuff going. Big shout out as well to Cloggin, who has really helped with some of the technology side of things, just getting me a little bit more cleaned up on some of that stuff. But that is it for this series. Thank you so much for watching. Take care, and we will see you next time.